Welcome back to Hope 2020. Again, as a reminder, if you have any questions for our speakers, the only way you can ask is to be part of the conference, and the only way you can do that is via getting tickets at hope.net. All of our questions in the Matrix chat we will take at the end of the talk. We will present them to our next speaker, Michael Morgenstern, speaking about combating disinformation and tribalism through media. Social media has created a balkanization of conversation. Trapped inside our filter bubbles, the walls between us have solidified, and our narratives and our identities can be hacked. Michael Morgenstern is a filmmaker, technologist, and a culture hacker. He has produced and directed 3 films in over 70 festivals worldwide. And Michael Morgenstern, take it away.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, really happy to be here and appreciate the opportunity to talk about disinformation. It's a topic that is on a lot of our minds and affects a lot of the way we live in the world today. So I'm a film director. I've been making films since I was 13, and I've created a number of different films as well as interactive immersive art experiences and pieces of technology. I built a Facebook tool called Facebook Searches Back, which allowed people to search through their social graphs. And that was probably the thing I was best known for there. And a few years ago, I started embarking on this journey to create a global interactive internet film based on a story from Reddit. And in the process, have become a student of disinformation, spoken to a lot of people who are very concerned about what disinformation is doing to our civil discourse and to the way we interact with each other. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my perspective on disinformation, what I've learned through that journey, and also share some about our project, which is launching in September. Yeah, why don't we start with the trailer for the project?
I'm posting this because I'm afraid, and my sister Mia is missing. I don't know where she is, but what I do know is that the person who took her, David King, is extremely dangerous.
I dare you.
To do what?
To ruin my life.
Why did y'all dare each other to ruin each other's lives?
When you're challenged, you get stronger. It sounded like a fun game.
That's fucked up.
Team Takedown? What is this?
Total social revolution. He's a part of a huge shadowy organization.
I'm gonna learn everything I can about Team Takedown.
What's up, internet? So shit's getting real.
I'm scared, Xander. Let's come home.
Thanks for all the positive replies. You guys are making it a lot easier for me.
If you see David, share here. We gotta do what we can to find him. I want Mia back. I know you're watching.
Where's my fucking sister, David?
Everyone, we have come to the crux of the story. This is the focal point that all of these videos have been leading up to. I didn't realize how strong I could become. It's only after you lose everything that you are free to do anything.
Let's do a little bit of a thought experiment, huh? You've got 2 possible versions of reality.
So he faked the call.
That's terrifying.
Or was the call that we just had fake?
No, we cannot stop believing everything right now.
First is the Xander Jones story.
You can't just say you didn't do something when I have a photo of you doing it.
It's photoshopped. He can fake evidence.
That I'm a 19-year-old criminal mastermind.
There's 4 keyloggers on your computer. He's been watching every key that you type.
I hacked every account he had.
Don't delete it. It's safer when you know what you can't trust.
I killed innocent people. And it turns out there is a simpler explanation.
I think we gotta stop playing this game.
We can't. He's in control of the narrative. I mean, there's no quitting.
So that's a trailer for a movie that's going to be released over the internet over several weeks, as if it's actually happening. So that movie is based on a story from Reddit that was really popular several years ago, and it's about a lot of different people, 2 different characters who are interacting with each other and in a fight, and the entire internet jumps on board and plays this interactive game with them. And so we're blurring the boundaries between immersive theater, film, technology, social media, and reality and fiction, which is something that is happening now in a lot of different aspects in politics. So I want to take us through a bit of a journey of disinformation. So disinformation is not anything new. We've all believed things that are true and things that are false, and we've had different tribal groups that believe different stories about each other. But it's changed recently in a really fundamental way. So right now we're in a period of extreme information warfare. This is a screenshot from the Plandemic video, which went viral based on some stories that Dr. Fauci was part of creating a conspiracy related to related to COVID, and this type of thing is happening more and more, where there's a lot of widespread beliefs that are clearly fictional, or someone really believes that this is true and someone else believes that that is true. And I like to call the period of time that we're in the narrative economy. So the attention economy was a time when people were competing for your attention to click. But right now, people are competing for your story. And the tools for telling the stories and retelling the stories that we tell ourselves are getting increasingly more complicated. And as artificial intelligence starts to enter the picture, they're getting increasingly scary. So the Plandemic, QAnon is another conspiracy theory which has blown up recently, which weaves together a whole bunch of other different conspiracy theories and is very well produced. So if you haven't checked out some of the QAnon materials and videos, I don't quite recommend it. They're extremely seductive and they pull people in. And once somebody will watch several of them, it becomes a lot more. It becomes a lot easier to get pulled into that story, and even people with an extreme amount of intelligence and an extreme amount of discernment, we are extremely hackable when it comes to these things. So let's start talking about tribalism. So the standard tribal conflict: I'm good, you're bad. This is the way that we build our identities in our societies. We have a group of people that we are friends with, that we are together with, who is our community identity. And then there's groups of people that are the other. And sometimes it's an other that we don't have any conflict with. It's an other that's, oh, well, those are aliens over there. We don't really talk to those aliens. They don't really talk to us. Sometimes it's another that we have extreme conflict with. And a lot of the time when there's an other that we have extreme conflict with, a part of the way that we define our identity is through not being that other. And we see that in Democrats and Republicans in America and a lot of different political party conflict. We see it also in many types of interpersonal conflict. So this is something that's as old as time. It's something that I would say is endemic to the way that humans think and function. It's not something that I really think is ever going to go away. Humans are tribal creatures. We define ourselves by what other people believe, and that's just the way it's going to be. But what's changed is that we have added another form of intelligence into the mix. So first, I'll talk about what changed more recently, which is social media. And social media is possible to imagine without artificial intelligence. Social media is social media is possible to imagine without extreme artificial intelligence, but simple forms of artificial intelligence aren't necessary for sorting and ranking algorithms like Facebook has. So when I go on Facebook, Facebook will watch the things that I like, the things that I react to, and optimize for the amount of time I spend on the site by showing me things that I'm more likely to react to. So Facebook tends to show me my communities that are close to who I am, people who say things that I will either love or hate, and it creates a term we are probably all familiar with: filter bubbles. So the filter bubble is showing me a filtering of what's happening around me, or what's happening with people who think just like I do, instead of the people who are physically around me. So with the pandemic more recently, what's happened is the walls between the filter bubbles have become more opaque. A lot of us have spent months inside of our rooms, not interacting with many people outside of them. And so we interpret this social media as our real reality. So before, what was a check on this altered, warped reality that is social media is no longer there. And it's easier and easier for us to talk to only the people who believe exactly like we do, which is why we're seeing so many conspiracy theories so sharply on the rise right now. So let's talk about the semantic structures of human thinking. So humans are semantic creatures. We are metaphor machines. We do not have a dictionary of what specific words mean. We understand what a word means through context. So for example, if I say the word silly to you, you have heard that word 1,000 times. Each time you've heard it, it was paired with a visceral experience. And so over those 1,000 times, your brain has developed a circuit of what silly means. That is unique to your brain. That comes with an extraordinary amount of context into relationships. And so as I say a sentence, you form a structure of meaning inside your mind, which means that when we are speaking, we're activating each other's memories. So if I talked about my childhood sitting beneath oak trees versus my childhood sitting beneath aspen trees, for some of you, one would evoke a feeling of nostalgia, one would not. These are deep semantic structures that are built into our brains, and it's possible for us to live for 50 years with another person without having a strong sense of what those deep semantic structures are. But that's the sort of thing that artificial intelligence is really, really good at. And so what we are going to see over time in the coming years is a deeper and deeper mapping of our mental models and ability to persuade us based on different types of stories. And I believe that we are going to get to a place where you can show 10 people the same video, and 3 people will think it's a really nice video, 5 people will get slightly disturbed, and the rest will go out and kill somebody. And I do believe that we are going to find that humans, the space of manipulation in humans is much greater than what we imagine it is now, more than we can even guess. As an example, when AlphaGo, which is a computer that was built to beat humans at the game Go, played humans and beat some of the top masters in Go, one thing that the masters said was, we thought that these were the moves that worked in Go, but it turns out the space of moves is bigger than that. And so the computer was making moves that the humans hadn't even thought about, because the computer had mapped the entire space of moves and picked the optimal ones. So the humans initially thought the computer was making dumb moves, which later turned out to be a much better strategy than the ones we had discovered. So I firmly believe that human manipulation is going to work like that. So if you can hack the semantic structures, it gives you a much stronger tool to hack the tribal structures. Hacking the tribal structures means that I believe that I am in this tribe and you believe that you're in this tribe, and the information system that we're in will tell me something about your tribe and tell you something about my tribe, and do this very subtly. And as this happens, more and more wedges are driven in between different tribes. So one example that I really enjoy is I was speaking to somebody about some of the content that Russian trolls had put out during the 2016 election. One article was "Real Texans Don't Wear Flip-Flops." So you wouldn't think that that is by itself an incendiary article, and it may in fact have been part of the noise intended to drown out the signal of what the Russians were trying to do. But when you examine it, it is part of this larger strategy that if we can get people to believe that the other people are not like them, then they are more willing to believe negative things about those other people. This is something that's incredibly hackable because we take our tribal identities from other people. So I want to say something that is somewhat controversial, but I really do believe it's true, and it's that disinformation is not the problem. Yes, disinformation is a problem. Disinformation has been a problem forever, but disinformation is not what is tearing our society apart. It is the tribalism that we've had inside of our society since the dawn of civilization that now is hackable, and disinformation is a tool to make the problem worse. So as an example, if you and I really have a lot of love for each other, and we know that we disagree about something big, we're not going to sweat it. But if we hate each other and there's something that we disagree about, we will use that disagreement and we will use those facts in order to make an argument for why we dislike somebody. Humans are emotional creatures, and we often justify our emotions using information and facts. So if it's possible to map a group of humans, and humans are incredibly hackable in the aggregate, we have very well-known attack surfaces, map a group of humans, figure out what their emotions are, and play on those with facts that pull into the emotions, it's very well studied that we will accept things that look like facts that fit within our worldview in a certain way. So this is very scary. It's something that certainly keeps me up at night. And I think that it is a major problem that we have to solve. I do think there are probably some solutions. And this project that we're creating is intended as a solution and as a way to point a path forward. We have to redefine the narrative. We have to realize that our top level narratives have been taken away from us. The Facebook sorting algorithm has taken the role of telling us what's going on in the world. It's an algorithm meant to increase our usage of Facebook. It's not an algorithm meant to appropriately reflect the world or reflect the world in the way that we want them to. So the first step is on a societal level, we need to see the invisible structures of persuasion. We need to start seeing how these algorithms are changing the way that we perceive, but also how our tribal conflicts are being attacked. I have seen this personally, and when I started on this journey 4 years ago, I was not as convinced that we could do much about this. But I've seen in people who start talking about some of these tribal issues and start seeing how we can be hacked, the ability to stop that hack in its process and pause things and say, wait a second, we are playing into a tribal conflict right now. Let's pull back and think about this another way. And so building in that ability to notice what's going on and then immediately de-escalate needs to be a core part of the way we think about media literacy. The other thing is tell new tribal stories. So I have a lot of issues with the original story of America, the story of the melting pot. It was a story that built in a lot of racism and a lot of sexism. One point that I do want to make about that story is that story was created when a whole bunch of immigrants came to America with the intention of creating a single unified country. So that story took America from a place where particular groups were in conflict and battle with each other to a place where multiple groups took pride in their differences as part of a broader society. There was, the colonization narrative of that is awful. So, there's a lot to talk about there as this comes into it. But I do believe that sort of a process, seeing ourselves as a single human species in order to embrace our differences, that there are ways that we can tell and retell and retell and retell the tribal narrative that result in a peaceful society. So I'll tell you a little bit about our project. First, let's go back to the old days of movies. The old days of movies were a single linear piece of content. You went, you sat down, you turned off your phone, and you experienced the movie start to finish. This is actually surprisingly similar to the new days of movies. Right now with Netflix, your experience is fairly similar to watching a movie in a movie theater in the 1920s. You hit the play button, put the remote down, and the movie goes, and then it's done. Afterwards, you might talk about the movie on social media, you might make a meme about the movie, but otherwise the movie is a single linear passive experience. So we set about trying to create something that's a lot more interactive. We call it alternate reality cinema. So alternate reality cinema, it's taken from the term alternate reality game, ARG, but I also like to use the word arc, because what we're really doing is we're creating an arc. We're creating a narrative arc that feels like an event that then a whole bunch of different stories play into, that can integrate different stories, influencers, celebrities, people, groups, and social movements, and have those players interact as part of the story. Why is this important? Because stories are the way that we understand ourselves. Stories are the fables that give context to the world that we live in. It's important that we're able to retell those stories. So this comes from a lot of this comes from my immersive theater background. I've done immersive theater events, and some people on our team have done large immersive theater events with hundreds of people playing out over several days with multiple intersecting storylines. And immersive theater is a great model for how things work on the internet. It's chaotic. You don't know exactly where someone's going to be at any particular time, and you still have a desire to tell a long-term story over the course of several days. So we've taken a lot of that model and we've applied it to how to build a social movement plus a film on the internet. So some of the aspects of this, yeah, it's co-created. The idea is not that everyone is just experiencing our content and taking it in. It's that we are building a overall framework and rules for engaging with the content that then the internet can take and tell their own stories. And these simple themes that we are telling a story about, and these simple characters that are archetypal about the different roles in those stories, will go out over the internet. It's responsive in the same way an event or a social media thing is responsive. It's empowering, and it's completely networked. All these things are interacting with each other. So the story is called "I Dare My Best Friend to Ruin My Life," and it's about two kids who get in a fight after, as the two of them, one of them has destroyed the other person's life, and the other one asks for our help in getting back what he's lost. I won't go into too many specifics of the details because I'm excited for you all to experience it. But this is it's a story that is a metaphor for the tribal conflicts that we find ourselves in, the us versus you. We have to get our group together in order to get what we need from that group. And it's not destroy that other group. It's we need to call them out for doing all the terrible things that they're doing to us. Or it's not they are organizing themselves for their own interests. It's they are coming together to destroy us. So what we are intending to do through this piece of performance art is build those framings about something metaphorical that doesn't relate to the rest of the political environment, and then through that lens, create a space for people to talk about that. So it's going to be multiple different episodes released over social media over a week and a half. And the ending of it will be a call to civility. And it will be a wrap up and a twist of everything that you've seen before, which ends in us asking some pretty deep questions about why these kinds of conflicts start and how we play into those. So yeah, we can talk a little bit about the evolution of cinema, because there certainly has been an evolution. We initially had home movies that people were creating at their home, and then the studio films were the first films that were seen broadly. So someone created a film and then sold it in a lot of different places and put it into theaters. So now you have a lot of different people watching the same film. At some point, the tools for creating those films became a lot cheaper. Once those tools became cheap enough, anyone could jump up, or almost anyone, or anyone who had some amount of support could stand up and make a film and then show it using that same system that was used to make studio films. So when that happened, there was more diversity of perspective. It was still people with enough privilege to be able to make those films, but there was a ton more diversity of perspective, and there was the opportunity for some disruption. After that came web video, and web video with a phone or with a digital camera. The early days of YouTube, where things were this tiny little 480 pixel window, opened this up to anybody. And at this point, the ability to make a video is extremely democratized. So anyone with a perspective, anyone with something to say can make a video, which has completely changed the types of videos that are popular. It's not just a certain small subset of people picking which videos are popular. It's anybody can put out videos, and then the crowd gets to choose what's popular. Now we're coming to alternate reality cinema. So it's basically every time that technology has improved, the stories that are told over technology and who tells those stories have changed. And at this point, social media and the way that we have discourse online has created tools for an activity that cinema has not yet taken advantage of. But there's a lot of reason to believe that this is what's about to happen. So cell phone video is getting much higher quality. With machine learning soon, it's going to be possible to create extremely cinematic looking images, to edit things on the fly, to release things that feel like full Hollywood movies in real time. We also have the coming advent of augmented reality. So augmented reality, whether it's 3 months away or 10 years away or 15 years away, consensus still seems to be by most people that it's coming at some point. I'm not going to put a date on it. But if we have augmented reality glasses, augmented reality contact lenses, or even just screens in different places, it makes sense that stories start getting told everywhere, and that stories start getting told in different ways. And so we move away from necessarily a 3-act structure to a storytelling structure that is more integrated with the rest of our world, which doesn't mean that stories don't have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They certainly can, but there's a lot more complexity to the way that they're told. At some point, we'll probably add artificial intelligence to, in the process of telling those stories. the way that our projects works is we're replacing a lot of the conventions of other stories. Our narrative structures are very, it starts with a very traditional narrative, very traditional hero's journey, and totally twist that on the end. And I think that the way that this project is different, or this story is different than a lot of the stories we watch in movies, is instead of the protagonist being being a person on the screen, and usually in these movies, a story, well, okay, I'll go back to, usually in a movie, a story is a linear story. There's a typical narrative progression, and a lot of time it's about a character called the protagonist who wants something. Usually it's a white man. And the question of the movie is, does this person get what they want? There's other stories out there. It's just that these are the stories that we have been trained are the stories that should be told in movies. The protagonist in our story is we. It's the internet. It's the species. And I think that that's usually the protagonist in any online social movement. The internet has created a protagonist of we that we feel like we're a part of. The internet often also tells us about that protagonist. So part of the point of our project is that we get to tell ourselves about that protagonist. So alongside this project, we're creating an explosion of interactive content. There's a whole bunch of different pieces of storytelling that go along with this. We have 13 different groups creating their own linear stories that are interacting with this main story. We also have an interactive game that you can play if you want to go deeper into the story and join forces with the main character. We have a group that represents an online movement about creating a space for nuanced conversation and communication, which is going to be a key part of our story. We have the fictional hacker group, which is not a group you can join, but it's a group you can observe being toxic over there. And we have a bunch of other different projects. And so what's exciting about the way that we've built this is that we've really built an integrated model for storytelling so that any project that fits in the narrative can join. So we have 13 of these projects right now. We're going to build another 10 around influencers. Then once this happens, we're going to welcome anyone on the internet to essentially build their own project. Anytime you're interacting with us in character or doing something else, you are building one of these projects. And these projects explore various aspects of disinformation. Some of them involve aliens. The point of all of these things too is, and all pieces of this project is to be as fictional, sorry, is to be as obviously fictional as possible, so that we know that we are watching something fictional. So I'll just talk a little bit about the disciplines that came together in the creation of this company. It's really exciting that in our company we have a number of different disciplines, and each person, well, each discipline, the person who comes from that discipline has their own way of solving a particular problem. So a lot of the time we'll approach a problem and there's 3 different ways in the room to solve it, and we'll talk it through and we'll find the right solution, which means that we've created this blend of different ways of solving problems that feels quite unique. So immersive theater I've touched on. We create multi-day immersive theater events. Marketing and movement building, we have people who have worked in a number of large companies, like Reddit, for example, in building brand strategy, in building integrated marketing. And so they look at all the stuff that our narrative team, so we have a narrative team, then we have a marketing team, and the narrative and marketing team look at things from both perspectives to create something integrated. Then we have a large group of people who are advisors on disinformation, the ethics of disinformation, and what are the biggest problems now. And I've spoken to multiple journalists and thought leaders on this, because our goal is that we have a thorough understanding of what the problems are and what the possible solutions are. We have a film team, and then we have a tech team, and we have a lot of different folks who build and develop technology. We like to see technology as another form of storytelling. So to me, cinematography and UX and verbal storytelling, these are all elements of the same dynamics. And our intention is to combine them. So I'd love to open this up for questions. I really appreciate everybody coming and listening, and would love to have you be involved in our project as well. So you can shoot me an email, michael@definitelyreal.com. And we are looking for partners in all different ways. We're looking for places to put our projects, so distributors. We are open to talking with social media platforms, people who would like to partner with us in any way if you're creating some online tools for that. We are closing our round of investment very soon, and we're also looking for people who would want to play around with us and tell stories online. So feel free to shoot me an email, michael@definitelyreal.com. And if there are any questions, I would love to answer them.
Thank you for that talk. This was really good to talk about. Now, we do have some questions that have come in from the chat. As a reminder to our attendees, please ask your questions in the live stream channel. So, so you were mentioning the importance of stories, and again, as you have on your last card, there's you say stories are already everywhere. How does one protect one's story in this time when such stories are being manipulated?
Oh boy, that's a big. Is there like a sub question in there?
No, that was
I
just a
mean,
pretty.
yeah.
I know
How
it's
do
a
you
big
protect your
question,
story? Well, I think the first question to ask, and not to turn it around and get too meta, but our project is extraordinarily meta. We just had a case of mistaken identity within our company yesterday. Things are getting weird. How do you? But I think the first question is, what is your own story, and do we actually have our own stories? And I would argue that we create those, and those have been created for us. And so I think that the question for myself wouldn't be, well, let me find my story and defend it against the stories of others, but let me notice how my story came to be. And let me notice the process of telling myself my own story and retelling myself my own story. And let me notice how the people in my life and in my community are enforcing a particular story on me. Because that's what we are constantly doing socially. And it's not about being open-minded or not being open-minded. It's just a natural human process, is that we have an assumption about the type of ways other people are interacting in the world, and those assumptions end up being normative and enforcing those on each other.
Now,
that might have been a dodge.
Sorry, no, that's fine. You know what? I mean, sometimes the questions are big, sometimes they're small. I mean, another good question that just came in: what does creator intent mean in an environment where the creator has so little and apparently diminishing control over how their story is presented?
I think that speaks to a lot of why we're doing this way. And a lot of my thinking on interactive media started. I was in 2010. I interned for Ted Hope, who's a film producer, and was talking a lot about transmedia. And the idea that was really new to me is the first moment someone experiences your story is the moment they hear about it. And a lot of the time in media, people think about an advertising campaign as different and separate and potentially unrelated to a movie. But if the conversation about a movie, the advertising campaign about a movie, the articles that are written about a movie, that's all part of it. And so I think that the biggest answer I would give is to focus on it. Focus on how people are being presented something initially.
Okay. Now, is hacking the semantic structure the same as manipulating the context of an encounter?
Hacking the semantic structure the same as manipulating the context. Well, when I was talking about hacking the semantic structure, I was talking about a specific, a sort of narrow and specific thing. So I think both things are very related. But I was talking about hacking the way we use words in order to use words to get us to believe certain things. But yeah, the framing and context of something is also incredibly powerful. And we've seen in our project that's actually one of the things we play with a lot, is that we have a lot of our story has already been shot and created, but what hasn't been created fully and what is continually updating is the framing. And so the framing shifts over the course of the storytelling, and it can shift in response to real world events. It's interesting to notice as people change their framings as new information comes out, and often the story will change, but the story will stay the same, but the framing will change and shift and twist. So yeah, framing is certainly a way that we do semantic warfare.
You also mentioned how a lot of the major mainstream platforms in particular have machine intelligence trying to keep people in filter bubbles, trying to direct narratives. at the same time, there are random and semi-random systems such as IRC or element matrix. Do you view those kinds of social media or chat systems helping or hindering breaking through filter bubbles?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that the places where they have algorithmic sorting, like Facebook, are the places where disinformation is the most, is the strongest, or it has the greatest leg up. But a major place where disinformation is spread is Telegram. And there's a lot of places where disinformation can spread that are emails that people send to each other, chain mails, text messages. And so it's a question, if you're able to hack the human to the degree that that person now is inflamed enough or passionate enough that they want to share something around, that can exist on any platform. And then in that point, artificial intelligence is just playing a role in sending more of that information, in making that information even more powerful. So I think that there are narratives that can be created that are so powerful that will compel somebody to pick up the phone and call somebody. And yeah.
Interesting that you mentioned that last point. Early on in the current crisis, one of the more intriguing commercials that I heard on a local news station literally was to tell people to, think about someone they care about, now call them, and literally it was 5 seconds of silence after that.
Yeah, I wonder how many people did that.
As do I, to be honest. Speaking of disinformation, what role do you view for, say, state actors, private actors, and the general public in breaking through some of these filter bubbles on these platforms?
Mm-hmm. I think the platforms play a huge role. I think micro-targeting is incredibly dangerous. Micro-targeting has led to the ability to run, campaigns for climate change and to make a lot of positive impact. But really, Facebook is, and the other platforms, their intention is to build a giant manipulation machine. The more they are able to promise advertisers that they can push a narrative, the more advertisers are going to spend money. And so I think that the platforms have a lot to do. State actors certainly as well. We are in what feels like an arms race, where people, I've heard people say, well, the other side is using tactics of disinformation, and so for us not to use tactics of disinformation is to give up. And once we have that perspective, now that becomes normalized. And I think it's very similar to, you remember, like 2002, the phrase personal branding was like a really gross word. And like you'd say, what's your personal brand? And like, oh no, I'm not that kind of person. Now to talk about someone's brand is like, people talk about that all the time. And we just get more and more used to the idea of, communicating in a particular way.
Okay. On that same note, just to follow through, do you have any suggestions for how people could break through some of the disinformation about the other, if you will? So, for instance, you mentioned, for example, QAnon. Do you have any idea on how you would get somebody to interact with a person that's trying to give them information that is more factually supported, let's say?
Right.
As opposed to having them discount you right of hand as some other person, some non-relevant or potentially malicious person.
Right. The one quote that I love is, the best way to change someone's mind is to listen to them. And I think that's really true. That what I see a lot is we have two people who are talking with a completely different framing of the world. And in order to convince somebody of something, the work is on the person trying to convince them to understand their frame. And I think, I really don't recommend you watch QAnon videos unless you think you can pull yourself back. If you think you can pull yourself back, get with some friends, make it a point to have some self-care afterwards, but watch one of those videos. And to me, that's some of the real news about what's going on in this world today, because when I see a video with a 600,000 view count, and I find myself getting pulled into this story and wondering if, Hillary Clinton is indeed a sexual abuser and all these just awful things that they're saying about people, because of the way they present it. It's very convincingly presented, and it gives a lot of understanding for why somebody is operating that way. And I think that when we and it doesn't mean that someone's right, but when we judge somebody without understanding them, we just don't have the ability to communicate with them. We can't communicate with people we don't understand. And so if we actually have an intention of communicating, which is not to say that it's anyone's job to do this, but if somebody is genuinely interested in communicating, understanding is necessary for that.
So let's veer back into the film section again. Speaking of those particular propaganda videos, and well, that's how I'm going to view that, how I'm going to frame them, at least if that's how it works most accurately in my framing, at least. What is it about the QAnon videos that are powerful, and do you see similarities in, say, movies or films that, for example, Daesh would have produced to try and convince people, at least in their context?
Yeah, I think that the QAnon videos are, so I think QAnon is a dangerous conspiracy. I don't agree with what it says. And yet, and this is why it's so successful, I agree with most of the things that QAnon says. And these videos start with the things you agree with. There are people in power who are who are like lying to us. There are people in power who are convincing us of, who are committing fraud, who don't have your best interests at heart. And they start with a whole bunch of things that people strongly agree with. And then they slip in some other things, and then they slip in some other things. And, if the best amount I was told, I am not a researcher, is about 5% lies and 95% true. And if you give someone something that's 95% true or 95% they already agree with, let's say that, and 5% is new information, that's another way to look at it. That person is going to take in the new information, and then if you call them a week later, that new information will be integrated into their worldview. And that's just how we work. We're continually adjusting that, and so QAnon very expertly takes advantage of that. There's a lot of other things that they do really well. They also clearly have some funding behind them. And it's a scary thing to me that we have a lot of, it used to be that it took a lot of resources to convince a lot of people of something. And now for a few $1 million and some good psyops, you can get the whole world telling a story. And that is, that's sort of what we are doing performance art about, that. Like, look how easy it is to get everyone to talk about a story. Do you really trust these stories that everyone's talking about? Because the people who are students of this have mapped it so well that this playbook is just like, it works.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, like that you mentioned this. It basically it's a pace and lead technique that you're doing here, and the opposite seems to be sort of like, to throw back to politics, what Bernie Sanders did in 2016 when he went and had his speech at Liberty University. It's an interesting contrast there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Now, again, back to filmmaking. When you do make a film, do you imagine an audience in a big theater? Do you design, or for at home on a small screen? Do you design the narrative for people who may or may not have shortened attention spans and distractions while watching your media?
This is a great question. I love this question. A friend and I saw Star Wars, the new Star Wars recently, and we just kept joking. We were playing a game, which the game was this shot framed for a movie theater or a phone? And a lot of movies feel like they can't decide. You'll have this giant epic wide shot, and then you'll have a close up that's like this close instead of where you would put it if you were framing for a theater. Yeah. And it's a side note, but I think movies should have two versions, just like websites do. But I think about people with a short attention span for sure. That's the unavoidable reality of internet content. We're releasing 10-minute episodes, which is really, really going against the trend. Normally you would try to make these episodes 4 minutes, but I just think that the part of what we're trying to do is tell a complicated story on the internet. But I imagine in editing that every single second that something interesting isn't happening until about episode 3, when someone's bought in. Episode 1, you imagine they're just coming across it, is people are going to be totally distractible and lose things, and your audience can walk away. And it's a very different assumption than normally when you're editing a video, where you can start your video with a 3-minute shot of something, because you know that people have bought a ticket and they have popcorn and they're sitting in a theater and they're with a date, and they're going to sit through it. I do frame this movie is framed for cell phones. We did a lot in shooting this movie to make it feel extremely cinematic. So we went back to a lot of 90s tropes, or as I like to say, the 90s, but the way that we remember them. So we don't really jump cut. We don't really use handheld ever. We have sliders and dollies, and have very well composed shots, very colorful. And even though we're a low budget film, our intention was that when you hold this in your phone, you feel like you're in a movie theater. And this feels like cinema with a capital C. Because there's been a lot of interactive projects that have been released on the internet that fetishize the iPhone footage, and like, oh, we're just people who are on the internet just like you. And we wanted to create a different feeling, which is more like X-Men's happening, but it's happening in the world around us.
Okay. How much effort do you have to put into that first episode to try and hook your audience?
Oh boy, so much. That's where we're putting most of our storytelling effort. It's where a lot of our visual effects are. That first episode has to be exciting. It has to introduce the series and has to pull you in. And it's not true that if the first episode doesn't succeed, the whole series won't, but it's, you got to have a good pilot. And you'll see that for any television show. Is like the pilot episode is the one that gets worked on and worked on and worked on until it's just like a perfect piece.
Now, there's a criticism that I just saw come through the chat. Is formatting for, say, 5 to 10 minutes per episode just succumbing to the current trend of fast consumption? I mean, why should people be targeting movies with low attention to folks with lower attention spans?
I don't really have a great answer to that. It's the reality of creating any content on the internet. I have made content that is not designed to be internet content, and I will in the future. But you don't see a lot of content that's released on the internet that doesn't cater to that type of attention span. I think that there are ways to increase that. And our story certainly slows down after the first episode. But let's also remember that when we're looking at when we watch a movie, we learn about the movie through an advertisement, and that's a 30-second advertisement. So a lot of us decide whether or not to watch a movie with a 30-second advertisement. So if you think about our first episode as an advertisement, I've never seen a 2-hour-long advertisement on on television. So I do think. I think the other perspective too is that we are building content for a very long attention span. We're building content for an attention span of 2 weeks, which is much longer than the internet's attention span. We're building content for an engagement of depth that is much greater than most internet videos. And so we've been very deliberate about taking this structure and trying to use it to tell a complex, involved story that brings nuance into a conversation, rather than a really overly simplistic story that's been sort of chopped down for the internet.
Speaking of which, are these going to be discrete, complete episodes across all platforms, or will you have different pieces, different formats on different platforms?
Mostly similar on some platforms, some different on others. Yeah, our strategy builds platform awareness into it, so it depends exactly what part of the project and how it's being released and what day. But there's going to be 2 primary places where you can experience our content.
So one last question: when is this going to come out?
It comes out in September. We would love to have you on board. Please shoot me an email if you want to chat, and also definitelyreal.com. You can sign up for our email list, and you'll learn more about it when it comes out.
Michael Morgenstern, thank you very much for presenting your discussion here at Hope 2020. We can't wait to see this not yet titled project of yours in September. I hope you have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. Happy to be
Okay.
here.
Ground control, take it away.